game and story format has been criticized for not capturing the same feelings as past games, but even with that, the game is still held in insanely high regard by both fans and review pages for its handling of the transition between traditional linear Zelda to modern open world Zelda. Its charm and enjoyment is a big part of why it was still very popular in the years following release, which is honestly hard to achieve in this day and age of video games, as there's always a next game now, a bigger fish. But Breath of the Wild was still played, replayed, and discussed deeply in terms of lore, theories, and whatnot for years following. This type of charm just didn't carry with Tears of the Kingdom, or at least it's proving not to so far, at least long term, like pretty much most past games successfully do. It had those first few months like mentioned, but where we sit now, the vibe is very different to when Breath of the Wild was this old. Two big reasons for this are the copy and paste feelings, as well as lore issues for some fans. Part of why the charm hasn't lasted could be heavily connected to how much of the new content feels copy and pasted. For how much the Sky Islands were pushed and showed off in the marketing for this game, the result was really just the Great Sky Island being a super awesome introduction to the Sky Islands, for the very rest to be very similar to one another. The same names, the same shrine puzzles, and not much variety in looks either. The same goes for the devs. Another massive new area. A lot of content down here has also just been copy and pasted from location to location. You could drop a general screenshot from the devs and have very little way to identify where in the depths you are. This is a problem as it all looks the same. There are no underworld regions or much matching the regions above. The only exception is a few lava falls in the depths of Eldin. Otherwise, everywhere's the same. The game being set in the same base world as the previous installment was always going to need to be stellar in its new areas, but in reality, they were cool for the initial burst and exploration, but quickly lost their value when you found out what the rest of it's like. Then there are lore and continuity problems. I myself am on the side of not being super bothered by most of these, but still a little bit like, come on, really? However, there are a significant number of fans, including a good amount of content creators, who really aren't that impressed by some of the lore contradictions and inconsistencies this game created. Now, we do of course already know that Nintendo very much focuses on the game itself, before even tying in any lore and connecting stories. That being said, this game takes the cake when it comes to them. Inconsistencies and timeline changes have been a thing in the series for years, but Tears of the Kingdom really flipped it 180 and then threw it out the window and then pushed it down the drain. I don't even know where I'm going with this. I guess with all of the other reasons attributed to this feeling of less charm, this doesn't help either. Some characters have aged, some haven't. The Zonai were said to be a barbaric tribe, they're furries. What is going on? It's just an odd place to be. The
Honestly,
game itself as a video game is really good. It's a contender for Game of the Year, no doubt. But when broken down into what
I think the Zonai can be both still the furries, but also the barbaric tribe mentioned.
It dropped uniqueness in certain areas for genericness. The Sky Islands in particular really were, given how much they were
it's a long time.
to release.
A lot of things can happen when, give or take, 100,000 or so years. Who's to say at some point the Zonai simply became Hylians, who worship the Zonai who are no longer part of the world.
Tears of the Kingdom just faced the same thing again. But hey, those views
and now have very barbaric
Sure, the game lacks in certain areas, but there is still a lot of work to improve it. The Sky Islands may become boring very quickly,
that's
but
retcon
beautiful
still.
sunsets though. I think enough time has passed for me to say that I do understand the view of this game just feels like DLC. I do not personally feel that way, but I do understand the view a lot more. I guess where I'm going with this is that I just wish the hype was the same as when Breath of the Wild came out. few months before Tears of the Kingdom's release, I discussed with fellow creators and friends about how we'll have a good few years of really big hype, just like Breath of the Wild did. But maybe I was naive for thinking it would be the same or super close. Maybe I disregarded things from a more casual fan perspective. Maybe I was just being too obsessed with the idea that this game would be an improvement on Breath of the Wild. Maybe I was wrong. Are Zelda games losing their charm? No. No, they are not. Despite everything just said, feeling like it was building up to that answer, or the answer being yes, I'm very confident in saying no. Let me explain why I feel this way. Modern day Zelda games are simply just finding themselves and redeveloping as open world games. You gotta remember, for a solid 25 years or so, the series was fully linear. The format changed with Breath of the Wild. It's gonna take time and a bit of a learning curve with each game, which I personally believe Tears of the Kingdom will be a massive part of. It is only the second 3D open world game in the series, taking into account it shares the same world as its prequel, and it's almost like these two games are just one massive game. The next mainline game really started to be more and more exciting because of how much Nintendo could build on what it started with Breath of the Wild for open world Zelda games, and expanded with Tears of the Kingdom, whilst also learning what not to do when making a new open world Zelda game. Maybe tone down the size slightly and focus more on filling a smaller space to the max. A big video game world is nothing without content you want to explore within it. I think Nintendo will work on these things going into whatever comes next with the series. And to go even deeper, these last two games were also set in a post-apocalyptic setting. First time round, pretty cool. Second time round, yeah, it's still cool, but you just have this. Whatever comes next will likely return to the more lively and vastly populated world that we are more familiar with in Zelda games. That, in an open world Zelda game, sounds so awesome. It's something we haven't seen yet. Obviously, we know absolutely nothing about what's coming next at this moment in time. But man, it's really exciting just thinking about all the possibilities and routes this next big game could take. The charm and pure joy that The Legend of Zelda creates for fans all around the world is not lost at all. It's simply finding itself and navigating through the new demands of open world. On a personal level, my hype and excitement for our current game, Tears of the Kingdom, is not going anywhere anytime soon. Games with flaws aren't bad games. This game is not bad at all. Like pretty much any game, it has areas that could be improved, and I'm sure these will be worked on and changed up with the next mainline game. I'm still really enjoying making videos on Tears of the Kingdom, as the world is full of interesting locations, details, and mysteries. Yet, the initial burst of excitement is past, but I'm still enjoying the game, and there are of course still tons of fans enjoying it as well. As I said a few times throughout the video, this is in no way to say anybody who feels differently on the matter is wrong or invalid. You are totally valid. I was just inspired to share my thoughts as things just felt a bit doom and gloom recently, and I wanted to drop my 2 cents on the situation. A massive thank you goes to my channel supporters for helping to make these videos all the more possible, with a special mention to new supporter, Josk. Much appreciated. I offer a few cool goodies if you'd like to be a big part of what makes this possible. The links are below, as are my socials and Discord server. Thanks for watching. I hope you all have an amazing day or night, and until the next time, I've been iRogamer.
Sure, a name. She's a car. I know, I'm so good.
I wasn't planning to make a video about Super Mario Bros. Wonder because this is primarily a channel where I dissect video game stories and characters, and there is absolutely no story to be dissected in the Super Mario Bros. Games. And also because I don't really like the 2D Mario games.
With a horse, it should be safe for me to
3D games,
cross the bridge and beyond it, even if random enemies like guardians spawn in.
Never really clicked for me, so I didn't have high expectations for Super Mario Wonder. But to my immense surprise, I absolutely adore this game. I love it so much I have to tell someone about it, and because I have no friends, I just have to tell the internet. The problem with the new Super Mario Bros. Games, whose derivative style has dominated Mario side-scrollers for the last 2 decades, is that their game design lacked any sense of surprise. The new Super Mario Bros. Titles were good platformers, not so much because of anything they were doing particularly well, but more because they just didn't do anything wrong. They are genuinely merely flawless games, but they are also boring. They are like diamonds in that you can readily recognize the expertise, the precision, the quality, the weight of institutional knowledge that went into the creation of these games, but uninteresting because it's not visibly different from any other diamond you've ever seen. For better or for worse, it's everything you would expect a diamond to be. Whenever I played a level in New Super Mario Bros. U, the most recent entry in the series, I knew exactly what to expect. I knew exactly what kinds of enemies, obstacles, and challenges I would encounter. I was never surprised by them. For better and for worse, it was everything I expected a Mario side-scrolling platformer to be. Super Mario Wonder promised to finally change all that. It has been advertised to be surprising. Its slogan is, jump into the unexpected. I was a bit skeptical of its claims. It's so long since a 2D Mario game did something genuinely unexpected. It was hard to believe Wonder would really be any different. So the big question is, does Wonder actually do something different? Well, the game does have a lot of new enemies and power-ups that change up the way you play in small ways. There's this new drill power-up that lets you drill into the ceiling of the level to avoid enemies and obstacles, which is pretty cool. There's a new dolphin badge that changes the way Mario moves through the water for the first time since the release of the very first game in the series. Instead of that slow little pathetic flap he usually does, you're able to fly through the water way faster, and the aquatic movement feels so much smoother and more fluid than ever before. There are a lot of new little creative platforming challenges too, like these high-speed rails that zip you across the levels and require really precise reactions and are super duper fun. One of my favorite new little bits is this level where you ride atop a platform whose parts are rapidly disappearing, which you can restore by bouncing into new platform pieces. So the level becomes this manic attempt to dodge deadly obstacles, stay on the shrinking platform, and also keep the platform itself growing all the time to replace the disappearing sections. And again, it's really fun. There are also these new micro levels where instead of just completing a normal-sized level full of different platforming challenges, you have to complete just a single teeny-tiny challenge. Solving these challenges feels like solving a puzzle, which isn't something I've really encountered in a Mario 2D platformer before. These often force you to use the mechanics in some unexpected little way. There's a genuine sort of aha moment when you figure out the solution that is really satisfying. The level design can be pretty interesting too. For example, the entire desert world is designed as an adventure game instead of as a pure platformer. In all of these levels, you have to explore and investigate and be thorough. You have to find secrets and hidden paths and solve puzzles. There are levels where I was exploring the dangerous, trapping, and treasure-filled depths of ancient desert ruins. And there was some actual atmosphere to the environmental design, which doesn't usually happen in Mario platformers. They are usually such zany, silly experiences. There's no room for real atmosphere. a style of gameplay I was not expecting to find in this game, and it's a really welcome change of pace. Pure platformers tend to start feeling pretty repetitive after a while, but this mid-game detour in gameplay design definitely alleviates that problem. There's also a new sort of Death Stranding-like multiplayer, which I was pretty skeptical of at first, because, like, I don't want to play with other people in my single-player platforming game, but when I gave it a chance, it turned out to be really unobtrusive, helpful, and fun. That's right, making Super Mario Wonder may be the second ever Strand-type game. As you navigate levels, you can leave behind little totems wherever you want, which can help save other players when they're about to lose a life. Whenever you're about to die, the game becomes this desperate, mad dash to find and reach the nearest totem, which may or may not be located in a convenient location. I thought this would feel like cheating, but it's actually pretty fun, without making things too easy and save some frustration. You can also encounter these ghosts or shadows of other players, which you can ignore if you don't care about them, or you can race them to the end of the level, or you can even help each other find hidden areas or overcome obstacles. For example, there was this challenge level where I needed to find 5 hidden seeds, but for the life of me, I could not find the last seed. I was bouncing all over the place for what felt like forever, searching for the last hidden platform and just having no luck at all. Then this other player, I guess noticing my trouble, went over to my missing hidden platform and jumped up and down until I noticed. Instead of completing the level then and there, I decided to pass on the thing. I waited around until another player showed up who was having the exact same problem as me, and so I showed them where the hidden platform was too. This game had created a situation where random strangers were helping each other complete an obstacle really organic and smooth in this way. It reminded me of the first time I ever played Journey. Just random people helping each
Holy
other out.
shit, is that a motherfucking royal bow?
It's something I never would have expected to be doing in a Mario game. It was a really cool moment. So, Super Mario Wonder is definitely far more creative and interesting at a moment-to-moment level than any other Mario Brothers game released in the last 20 years. But even with all that said, even with all these little creative changes and additions, if this was all Wonder did, it still wouldn't be a surprising game. It still feels and plays and looks a lot like every other 2D Mario platformer you've ever played. The thing that makes Wonder truly unexpected and exciting is the Wonder Seed. Before release, I thought these were just going to be a silly gimmick, something wacky to show off in the trailers. But now that I've played it, these Wonder Seeds really do transform the gameplay. When you pick up one of these seeds, the gameplay changes, sometimes in really dramatic ways. Touch a Wonder Seed and all of a sudden you'll be platforming atop a stampede of charging bowls, or Mario's body will stretch to a ridiculous length, changing how he moves and how you'll have to navigate hazards. Or he'll turn into a bubble floating up into the sky, or he transforms into a monster whose jumps rocket him up into the air at the speed of a rocket ship. Or, in what has to be my absolutely favorite change, Mario begins moving in a top-down perspective, while the rest of the level and all the enemies remain in a side-scrolling perspective. Mario is moving through the level in a totally new way here. This one in particular is such an interesting mechanic. I feel like a developer could make an entire game out of it. But in Mario Wonder, this is just one in a bunch of different things a Wonder Seed might do. And that's the really important thing about Wonder Seeds. Every single one does something different. You'll never see the same transformation twice. There really are 100 of these, and they all feel different. They all feel polished and playable. They all feel fun. They all feel ridiculous. The Wonder Seeds add a sense of surprise to the core of the gameplay. A sense of surprise that has been missing from 2D Mario games for decades. Every single time I touch a new Wonder Seed, I have no clue what is about to happen next. It's impossible to even guess what will happen next. Every time I start a new level in this game, I know that, at least once, I'm going to encounter something totally unexpected. Maybe something I've never seen in a Mario game before. It makes me excited to play more of this game in a way I've never felt excited to play any entry in the new Super Mario Bros. Series. I know I'm much fun, creativity, variety, polish, and most of all, surprise. It's an absolute joy to play. Description of this video. This distinct interaction between Protestant ethic and American exceptionalism finds its way into every facet of American life. It's not just about what I do, it's about what my neighbor does. And the country cannot be great unless my neighbor does what I do. Recall that the Protestant ethic is built upon pain. You must work hard to accumulate capital, and you must refuse to use the capital for pleasure. In so doing, you work to honor God and demonstrate your predestined sins. You can imagine then that a body of values that views rest and pleasure as ungodly and thereby un-American has an effect upon the arts in America. Whereas the Catholics and Orthodox churches have long been patrons of the art, with some caveats that we won't get into, Puritan American Protestantism has had clashes with the arts for about as long as it has existed. Consider, for example, how the Puritans interacted with the art of fashion. The Puritans dressed very conservatively, even by the standards of the time, as a response to what they deemed to be the garish appearance of Catholic clothing. In 1634, the General Court in Plymouth Colony spoke about the great, superfluous, and unnecessary expenses occasioned by reason of some new and immodest fashions, before they then banned slashed clothing, and wearing of silver or gold, embroidery, and lace, in what are called sumptuary laws. After all, what could be more immodest? In 1651, the General Court revisited the dress codes. The rich and powerful would wear gold, silver, and lace if they so desired. The court stated its utter detestation and dislike that men or women of mean condition, mutations, and calling should take upon them the garb of gentlemen. In other words, if they were poor, treating dress like poor wretches, ungodly, and wasteful. Boy, that sure sounds familiar. More means treated more things exist. Today in the United States, females do blame these girls and lesser all on their nice sneakers, or their uniforms, or their consumption of healthier cows. These lessers can indulge in luxury or pleasure as they should be paid for saving their money and accumulated capital, in status until they become chosen raters, like us. Failing to do so is un-American. Or for a more contemporary example, consider how Protestant ethic-driven American exceptionalism interacts with music. How, depending on how deeply one buys into American exceptionalism from the Christian lens, the only acceptable genre of music might be contemporary Christian music, like Christian rock, or country music, or fireflies. We should only consume music that has a purpose, like strengthening our faith, or at the very least, consume music that isn't damaging to our faith by being too fun to dance to, or too provocative. If we could all just do that and be godly people, America will become exceptional as it is destined.
This package feels weird.
Consider how Protestant ethic and American exceptionalism interacts with sports. It's not okay to just play basketball with your friends. Sports have to be justified in some way as being good for your health, or good for college entry, or beneficial to a future lucrative career. Has anyone in the past 100 years actually played lacrosse for fun? Think about the soccer mom or the baseball dad yelling at their kid or the coach. The leisure aspect of sports becomes lost in the Protestant ethic. Sports cannot be fun for yourself. They have to be labor towards the glorification of God. In fact, so ingrained is this ethic into American culture that even the context of glorification to God has been lost, and service to capital for capital's sake has become the norm. Video games, though, have an especially severe interaction with this particular facet of American exceptionalism, as video games are, number one, a rather young, poorly understood and emerging art form, and two, generally designed for leisure, and thus are not productive in nature. This is why you see so many studies and things trying to justify video games as being good for your cognitive development, or beneficial to your concentration, or helpful for your
I'm wearing a shirt this time.
It's not enough that video games are just fun, just engaging, just relaxing, as if video games were only that, there would be no room for them in the American way of life. The first video game widely available to the public was the Computer Space Arcade, released in 1971. In 1972, Pong was released to widespread acclaim. By 1976, video games had already run into their first moral controversy. The game in question was Death Race, an arcade driving video game where the objective was to crash a car into as many crude pixelated gremlins as possible in the allotted time. Upon hitting a gremlin, the arcade cabinet would produce a sound that approximated a scream or yell, and a little gravestone would pop up where the gremlin had once been. Now, 1970s American society was no stranger to violence. Lest we forget, the Vietnam War had only ended a year prior to the release of Death Race. And violence in movies and sex on TV were not uncommon. In fact, prurient content on television was subject to its own moral panic at the time, and shows like Charlie's Angels and Three's Company were even called Jiggle television. But Death Race was different. Death Race was interactive, and that interactivity was new, was foreign, and thus was distinctly dangerous. Death Race ended up as the 8th highest grossing arcade game of 1976, but due to public outcry, the game would be pulled from the market by its manufacturer. As you know, this was not the end of violence in video games, though. As video games became more complicated, more involved, more interactive, so too did the violence in those games become more realistic. Throughout the 70s and 80s, video games would be subject to substantial moral panic. What is moral panic? Well, moral panic is defined by Oxford's Dictionary of Law Enforcement as a mass movement based on the false or exaggerated perception that some cultural behavior or group of people is dangerously deviant, poses a threat to society's values and interests. In other words, moral panic is when people act against or panic about something that they wrongly or over-enthusiastically believe is hurting society's values or morals. Moral panic. The vast majority of video games were both non-violent and really designed for kids, but the moral panic directed at video games wasn't really about the violence at all. The real moral issue invoking panic was that video games were becoming popular, and as an activity of leisure, were cutting into productivity in such a way that it was beginning to look un-American, un-Protestant. But don't take my word. Even absent the context of violence in video games, in 1982, Surgeon General C. Everett Koop, the same Surgeon General who once rejected Ronald Reagan's push for anti-abortion laws by stating that it was not a public health issue but a moral issue, stated outright that video games might be hazardous to the health of young people, who, he said, are becoming addicted to the machines, body and soul. You heard that right. The Surgeon General called video games addicting to the soul. At the Western Psychiatric Institute and Clinic, Dr. Koop outright confessed that he had no scientific evidence nor research in support of his claims, but he predicted that such evidence would be forthcoming soon, as if one could produce scientific evidence about hazards to the soul. Moving past the 80s, on and following December 7th, 1993, a date which will live in infamy, members of the combined United States Senate Committees on Governmental Affairs and the Judiciary held a series of congressional hearings concerning the topic of violence in video games and the impact of that violence on children. At the time, rather
And I can't get away from this topic, can't I?
and Doom were amongst the most popular games on the market. Simultaneously, the unrelated homicides reached record heights in 1993. Record numbers that hadn't been seen since the 70s. Democratic Senator Joe Lieberman stated prior to the hearings that he would ban all violent video games when he could to enforce the method, which, amongst other things, protects speech. And during the hearings themselves, Senator Herb Kohl has mentioned the still rather young video games industry with a government-run regulatory body unless they could self-regulate or do something about content regulation. The industry's response was the establishment of the Interactive Digital Software Association, or the IDSA. The IDSA, which we now know as the Entertainment Software Association, or ESA, itself established the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or ESRB. The logic was, perhaps, if the adult nature of certain games could be made very clear to purchasers, responsible parents would choose to buy age-appropriate games for their children.
Such as Dark Biotics moving the chain.
That didn't quite happen, though, and video games remained an easy scapegoat for societal ills, even compared to television or movies. The elderly and aged amongst you might recall Jack Thompson, who filed the first anti-video game lawsuit in 1997, alleging that violent video games, for some reason were responsible for the Heath high school shooting of 1997. The apparently arbitrary inclusion of these prurient adult websites reveals to us the underlying logic for this lawsuit. Video games, like adult websites, are a source of immorality. It's not just that they are violent, they belong in the pornography box of un-American, un-Christian materials. The suit, James vs. Meow Media Incorporated, was filed in the Sixth Circuit, where it was dismissed for failure to state a claim on which relief could be granted amongst other things. The Circuit Court's decision was then affirmed on appeal. As for our righteous moral crusader, Mr. Jack Thompson, he would be disbarred by the Florida Supreme Court in July of 2008 for making false statements of material fact to the court, engaging in prohibited ex parte communications, accusing a judge of being amenable to fixing cases, sending courts offensive sexual materials, falsely accusing opposing attorneys of conspiracy, etc. I won't go through the entire timeline of video games interacting with American morality. I think we get the picture. In 1998, the release of Grand Theft Auto caused moral panic. In 1999, the moral panickers blamed the video game Doom for the Columbine massacre. In 2005, as the United States was embroiled in the war in Iraq with all of the...
Of course, everyone knows large-scale problems are caused by a single thing rather than multiple things, all spiraling to create one stupid bullshit.
Said, and I quote, "It is almost routine in popular games for players to spray other people with Uzis, to drive over pedestrians, to kill police officers, to attack women, and in some cases even to engage in cannibalism." She would further state that this policing of video games was not
There's no cannibalism in
GTA or regulation of content.
Wait, is there?
Let me ask all of you.
I never got past mission 2.
What is it about? But states quite simply, it is about protecting children and empowering parents. In other words, it's an issue of morality and of...
I was fucking 8 years old when I played the first GTA.
Games of 2005 were a non-violent racing game in Gran Turismo 4 at number 1, a football game Madden NFL 06 at number 2, Nintendogs at number 3, Pokemon Emerald at number 4, and Mario Kart DS at number 5. In the top 10, there were 2 arguably violent games, Resident Evil 4, a horror game, and Star Wars Battlefront 2.
Yeah, Resident Evil 4 is a horror game.
Content was considered tame even in 1977.
No, it's not.
Senator Clinton then proposed a bill prohibiting the sale of M-rated games to those under 17.
It's like calling Castlevania a horror game.
Authority for the FTC to get directly involved in investigating game ratings, and authority for consumers to register complaints with the FTC for misleading game ratings. AKA allow the morally panicked public to police video game content. And consider this. Despite this bill allowing people to police ratings, ratings were never the stated issue, and nobody had a problem with ratings and accuracy. The issue was purely moral.
This area over here is called YouTube.
moment you see Mewtwo, he's in this pose. 3 fingers. It means hail Satan.
Bruh.
How to enter into the world of witchcraft, how to cast spells, how to use psychic phenomena, how to report supernatural powers against their enemies, how to fantasy roleplay. Pokemon World is a world of the demonic.
The bill never made it out of committee, and in 2011, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that all such legislation was unconstitutional and that research evidence could not support any claims that such intervention was necessary. Video games, the Supreme Court says, are art. That's right. You spent 3 hours listening to Jacob Geller when you could have just checked in with the Supreme Court this entire time. If you're interested in the topic of violent video games,
the law agrees that games are art?
I direct you to the book Moral Combat: Why the War on Violent Video Games is Wrong by Patrick M. Markey and Christopher J. Ferguson, an excerpt of which I will leave in the description for you to peruse. We're going to take a step back now and put the pieces together to understand how Christian video games fit into this puzzle. You will note, though, that the moral panic surrounding video games, violent or otherwise, is not a partisan issue. Moral panic is as American as apple pie, or, as the case may be, Protestant ethic. To summarize what we've learned so far, the Puritan ideas of predestination and asceticism, which derive from Calvinism, inform the idea that one must refuse luxury or leisure in order to single-mindedly glorify God in one's labors. This, in turn, means that there is no room for anything ungodly and anything prurient, anything violent, anything frivolous, anything fun, anything deemed deviant, in whatever ways that means, has no place in the life of a predestined Christian eager to resolve their uncertainty. The Protestant ethic, then, serves as the foundation upon which American exceptionalism is built. The belief that the United States is somehow extraordinary when compared with the rest of the world and is destined for some unusual greatness if we can merely embrace the values that make us American and thereby great: hard work and thrift, strictness of the body, of the mind, of the spirit, and of the wallet, in service of God's plan. The Christian video game, then, is an interesting conundrum. There are plenty of video games that explore Christian themes or use Christian imagery or iconography or offer critiques of Christianity in its myriad forms. But let us remind ourselves of the definition of a Christian game, derived, as you recall, from what a Christian considers an unchristian game. A Christian game is one that, number 1, espouses Christian values, number 2, directly implicates Christianity in theming, narrative, or marketing, and number 3, would be called a Christian game both by the intended audience and by its developers. Okay, Moody, I can hear you say, but all this time I wanted to tell you that I'm actually from Spain, and I'm Catholic, and we don't share these Protestant values, and in our value system, and by our consideration as an audience, Blasphemous is actually totally a Christian game. And that's fair, a very fair point. But as we'll discuss towards the end of the video, we are seeing more Christian games, in part because the video games industry has expanded globally, and potential Christian video game developers may not necessarily be influenced by American Christianity. A different definition of good and a different definition of Christianity changes the equation. In any case, we started the video off by mentioning the Christian media paradox. How does one espouse Christian values in entertainment media when one of the core Christian values that we are espousing is not to have fun when we could be working? How do we turn this leisure activity into something that is suitable for God's plan? Well, the answer that almost every Christian game developer seems to arrive at is, let's make the game educational. If our players are learning the Bible or about Jesus, their time isn't being wasted with leisure. It is instead destructive and productive.
I'm not sure if this is Panic Blood Moon or not. I don't have them disabled to make sure crashes happen less often, but the punitive system does mean I'll lose quite a bunch if a Panic Blood Moon happens at an unfortunate time.
Douglas makes a living playing educational games like Pajama Sam and Freddy Fish. But the difference between marine biology, problem solving, or American history and Christian values is that marine biology can be fun and Christian values aren't supposed to be. Which brings us to problem number 1. There aren't good Christian games because so many of them are designed to be overly educational and thus unfun. In other words, the games are too didactic. This was a much larger problem with older Christian games. We'll see,
I kept my
as we
souls.
consider this issue, the most obvious one was somewhat addressed as the genre of Christian games evolved. Consider, for example, Captain Bible and Dome of Darkness, a Christian video game released in 1994 by Bridgestone Multimedia Group. The game's plot sounds like it should be fun. Robots trap a city of humans in a dome of darkness. The Bible core manages to make a hole in the dome so that Captain Bible can be beamed into the city. Your goal is to enlighten those in the dark by collecting Bible verses.
Hell, why are there Bible verses in the machine?
Legend writes the following concerning Captain Bible and Dome of Darkness, and I quote, "As a kid, I had a lot of fun battling through these snipers and saving the people trapped in darkness. Playing this game again, I can only come to one conclusion. Young me was either easily amused or had a temporary stroke of idiocy." It is one of the better religious games that I have played. He continues by stating that the game's problem is that it is too repetitive, the messaging too heavy-handed, bordering on
Yep, like most education
the
games.
game is too educational, too Christian, and thereby both not that fun and overly preachy. A different player, Tron, states, "This isn't a game, this is a study tool, and an awesome one at that. Seriously, I could quote 100 Bible verses off the top of my head after playing this for a week." You hear that, folks? 100 verses. But it's not a game, and that's the important takeaway. Consider also the Christian Game Boy game NIV Bible and the 20 Lost Levels of Joshua, released in 1996. The game cartridge contains the entirety of the New International Version Bible, a Bible word game derived from the board game Memory, a Bible-themed version of Hangman, and a crude side-scrolling game. Again, this so-called game is more of a study tool, not a game. The word games are designed to teach you Christian words and verses, and the Bible is, well, the Bible. And the entire game is poorly put together, poorly presented, and not very fun. However, some Christian games do manage to be fun, and they can get past the fun hurdle and run directly to hurdle number 2, which is that Christian games tend to be derivative, meaning they are not new or interesting games themselves, they are merely worse versions of existing ideas. Consider the words of noted American philosopher Hank Rutherford Hill, who states the following concerning Christian rock music.
Can't you see you're not making Christianity better, you're just making rock and roll worse?
You're not making Christianity better, you're just making rock and roll worse. The game Bible Adventures was developed by Wisdom Tree and features a collection of 3 games based on Old Testament stories. There's Moses Ark, where you have to round up animals and food and bring them to the Ark. There's Baby Moses, where you play as Moses' sister Miriam and try to keep Moses from being harmed by enemies by carrying him over your head, like one might carry a vegetable in Super Mario Bros. 2. The third game is David and Goliath, where one controls David and tries to herd sheep and avoid predators before fighting Goliath with a sling. Even by
Wait, David and Goliath is a Christian story?
Sean Baby of Electronic Gaming Monthly placed Bible Adventures as the 19th worst game of all time. Games Radar was a bit more charitable and placed Bible Adventures as the
Oh, pizza's so
16th
tasty,
game
I want
ever
more.
made. What's the problem here? Well, the game was criticized as being, say it with me, overly didactic and highly repetitive.
Fuck.
In this case, of Super Mario Bros. 2. What does Bible Adventures bring to the table that Super Mario Bros. 2 doesn't do? Well, it has overly didactic Christian educational content. You can charge Noah's health by picking up and reading Bible verses. Sound very For a more contemporary example that is more highly regarded, let's look at the Dance Craze game. Dance Craze was created after the homeschooled daughter of Peter Fokos, the CTO of the game's developer Visual Play, asked him to create a dance game with Christian music. The result is a DDR clone that features exclusively Christian music. The gameplay is described as being virtually identical to Dance Dance Revolution.
That sounds pretty cool, honestly, but
moves from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen, and you have to step on a corresponding arrow on a dance
can you
pad.
imagine an
The arrow
OSU
reaches
map
the
of
target zone. game
the songs
passes
you'd normally
for
hear
one
during
month,
Sunday
but
Mass?
it is highly derivative. It is literally DDR, but worse and with Christianity. And in so doing, it remains potentially too didactic in that it only has Christian music. This Christian content, then, is the game's only real selling point. Which brings us to the third issue, which is that Christian games are often developed cheaply, with a low standard of quality and a low level of thought.
Of course they are.
Developer, that's what it does, apparently. It's good enough for the Christian consumer. Remember Bible Adventures, 19th and 68th worst game of all time, respectively? It allegedly sold 350,000 copies in Christian bookstores in 1991. To give you an idea of how many copies that is, the highly acclaimed Final Fight, the ninth selling best game of 1991, sold 476,000 copies. Super Mario Land on the Game Boy sold around 700,000 copies. Bible Adventures sold about half as many copies as Super Mario Land. If an overly didactic, hyper-derivative game produced with a near shovelware level of quality is all it takes to make big sales, why do more? It all suits our American Christian values anyhow, doesn't it? The game is educational, and so it is productive and not wasteful. The game is derivative, and so it reclaims something worldly to put to God's purpose. The game is cheaply made, which is frugal and responsible behavior. There are no, or maybe I should more precisely say, were no good Christian games, because of what Christianity meant to the American developers who made those games. For a video game to be adequately Christian in the American sense, it almost has to be bad. With all of this in mind, can Christian games be good? I alluded to this earlier, and this will surprise my fellow Americans, but there are Christians around the world that don't have the same body of Protestant values that we have built our identities around. You may remember from the beginning of this video that I am a Calvinist, a member of the Dutch Reformed Church. It is my denominational ancestors who are responsible for Protestant ethic in American society. But here's something curious. While American society readily embraced Puritan values, Calvinist theologians, the nerdiest and most bookish of all theologians, I posit, began to evolve and progress the theology of Calvinism past the Protestant ethic, a phenomenon that was already underway even before the Puritans.
How the fuck do you explain all of these guardians suddenly being removed in Tears of the Kingdom?
Holland is in the Netherlands. It's Dutch.
I mean, it's a lot of time, but
Because they shared a Calvinist belief, and then
someone had to go out of their way
because the Dutch were less
to remove these things.
which is to say you can be Christian, you can be American, you can even be a Calvinist without subscribing to Protestant ethic.
For what
Some people said
purpose?
if you are a Christian, you want to make a good Christian game, you have one of two options. Number one is don't be an American Christian. If you remembered our hypothetical Spanish viewer from before, there are ostensibly Christian games that are Christian through other lenses, and pursuant to other definitions of Christianity. Number two, however, is if you are an American Christian, to reject that deeply embedded, at times subconscious, Protestant American ethic while designing your game. Don't let the game be overly didactic. Don't let it be too derivative, and produce it with care and quality. In my research, I found only one clear example of a good Christian game, the narrative-driven game, That Dragon Cancer, developed by Numinous Games in 2016, which artfully tells the story of a family's struggle with cancer and faith through a decidedly Christian lens. It's heart-wrenching, it's meaningful, it's relatable, and it's approachable even for non-Christians. It talks about Christian values without smashing you over the head. It is creative and artistic and beautiful instead of being weird. It's a quality game that tells a compelling story and it's made with attention and it is possible to make a good Christian game. And I think it's possible without even necessarily having to make the game itself less Christian. The caveat, though, is that a good Christian game does need less of something. A good Christian game needs to be less American. Going backwards all the way now, the problem with Christian games is that to be Christian, these games almost have to be bad. Christianity makes for bad video games because Christian games were and probably still are largely made by Americans, and American Christianity is built from the Protestant ethic, which punishes leisure, detests joy, and loves work. And the Protestant ethic, you will recall, comes not from the Bible or from any theologian. It comes from personal uncertainty. Protestant ethic isn't Christianity. It is the
Where the hell did the Guardian go?
Lack of faith. Our ego. If we Christians can overcome our lack of confidence, if we can do that by accepting the uncertainty instead of fighting it, if we can overcome our egos by better understanding ourselves and others, if we can realize our faith in love instead of spite, we can do more than just make a better Christian game. We can make the world a better, more loving, more empathetic place for everyone. I've been your host. Go in peace. And thank you for tuning in. Now it's time for Silly Songs, the part of the show where Mooney comes out and sings a silly song.
What? You've never done this? Ah, so that didn't hurt that bad. Hey, that's my car! Man, I am good at aiming. Taka, sige. When you drop guts, you just bones. ain't that just great? Alright, let's just rush to... I can get the tower later. I need to save. I'm being called for lunch. And I am quite hungry. The worst part about Tears of the Kingdom is that horses are way less relevant. Therefore, I don't get to listen to this song as much. I mean, horses were efficient in this game, but they were too efficient. Since it's an incredibly boring, albeit quick and effective way of getting from point A to point B. You literally just press A every now and then. Ta-da!